My opinion for this season is that it's disappointing. I felt in about 7 of the 10 games we deserved more than what we received as far as points. It comes back to ourselves and our inability to score. I think defensively we were pretty strong throughout the majority of the season, but we had a good game plan. I thought we played well as a team. We just couldn't finish. And it's sort of been the story of the Silverbacks' life, But overall, happy with how the team performed in the majority of the games. I thought we finished pretty poorly at the end of the season. We completely retooled the team this past year. So we looked at the first season as part of the building process. We don't want to go through what we did last year. We made too many changes, both on the team as well as in the coaching staff. Our plan is to stick through the season, good or bad, with our coaching staff, and our hope is that it gets better. I mean, hindsight's 20/20, right? So you can determine whether that was the right move or the wrong move. At this point, I think we made what was the best move for the team. I don't think we finished any better at the end of last year that I think we would have finished with Ricardo still involved in the team. Our hope was that it would have gone in a better direction. Clearly, bringing in Jason at the end of last year, it wasn't much better, and obviously Pumbo finished it off. But I think our thought is we would have finished the same way that we did last year, which wasn't great if Ricardo was still involved. That being said, Ricardo's a great coach. He's a great person. I respect him, completely. But when things aren't going well, you've got to make tough decisions, and change is part of that. So repeat that again. So if Ricardo and Montoya would have stayed last year, would the outcome have been different? I think so. I mean, our goal was to have Ricardo as the assistant coach for Eric Winalda. When we brought on Ricardo, it wasn't for him to be the head coach of the team. He was hired as the assistant to Winalda. As a combined group, Eric and Ricardo, I thought they were great. I thought they were very effective. But with one being without the other, I don't think was as effective. And I don't think Ricardo could have continued on, in our opinion. And it's not just me. This was also Winalda decision as well as an ownership decision to not continue forward with just Ricardo. We thought Ricardo worked very well with Eric, but when it became his own thing, ownership and Eric and myself as a group didn't feel like he was the right person solely. It's a good question. A lot of it comes with the direction of the coach, who's been given the power to bring in the players that he wants to bring in. Gary Smith has his way about going about things, and the direction that he's chosen is to bring players from outside. He's looked at a lot of players in and around Atlanta. We're continuing actually to look at players. There may be some changes and additions at the halfway point, but at this point, that wasn't the direction Gary decided to go in, and he was given the complete power to make those decisions. Gary has the final say. So we brought in Gary because of his pedigree. He won MLS Cup in Colorado with a similar setup and situation with a low payroll and not as many assets as all the teams in MLS. So when bringing in Gary and his pedigree, the idea was that it was his decision to bring in players that would work for him. And it's a process. I mean, have we had immediate success? No, but it's a building block, and that's sort of step one. So yes, it's his team. Myself and Evan Mitz have some input, but at the end of the day, it's Gary's players. I mean, I would say at this point, I would agree that we don't have the players on our staff that are ready for that next step, like Poku was, and some of the other players that we've transferred up to Major League Soccer. That doesn't mean that the path we're taking is the wrong path. It's just currently the players that we've brought in all have more experience. Poku and the majority of the players that we had last year and in previous years, this was their first professional club. And there's some risk involved in that, and the fact that they've come here without ever proving themselves. And we've been very lucky and very fortunate that we've found some great players, and the coaching staffs that we've had in the past, including Ricardo Montoya, are to credit for that. They're great at identifying talent and bringing them in. The way we've gone this year is with more experience. Last year we didn't finish very well with an inexperienced team, so we've chosen a different path of finding some players that have more experience. Selling players is not a budget item that we're relying on. I mean, if you look at the league as a whole, there's only been a few players that any team has sold in the last few years, and we've sold 3 of those. I want to say maybe there's been less than 10 as a whole in the last 3 years from NASL. So you can't rely on the economics of selling players. It's not really the business that we're set up for at this point. Maybe if there was a long-term view of developing players and selling them on, like you see in South America and Central America, maybe it becomes a business model, but we're not set up for that. Currently, what we're just trying to do is create a product that brings success to Atlanta, wins games, and rewards our fans for coming out to the games. So that's a secondary thing. It never was our primary focus of bringing in players that we could sell, but I mean, it happened and we had success with it, but it's not the primary focus of the club. So you're referring to players that have gone on to other teams in the league, is what you're referring to? I mean, the jury's still out. We've only started with these players. We've had 10 games under our belt. Will some of these players turn into some talent that goes, whether MLS or other NASL teams? Who's to say? It's too early to tell. That said, it's a different mindset. It's a different way of going about it. And it's also based off of, I guess, the strong points of your coaching staff and your technical staff. Gary is big on trying to find players that have proven themselves. That's his focus. Eric knew a ton of talent that were sort of diamonds in the rough throughout California. Montoya knew a lot of players on the East Coast as well as in, especially in the Atlanta area. That was their strong point. Gary's strong point is finding players that have proven themselves both across the pond and here in the United States. So we're sort of leaning on the coach to go through what his style of finding and recruiting players is. In the past, it was finding unproven, and it's worked out well for us. Based off the fact that that's not Gary's way of doing it, we've got to focus on what his strengths are, which is recruiting talent. I've seen one of the reserve games. Gary and Evan have seen a few, and they've seen tapes of a couple as well. I mean, we've looked at it. They have the reserve team, which is a lot of the players that they've identified that are local to play, and you got Pumbo and Ricardo that are managing that. We've watched some games. There's a few players that we actually have our eye on, and I say we, meaning Gary, myself and Evan, are looking at. So there is some talent that we're looking at for sure, and that's a credit to Pumbo and Ricardo. That's what they're great at. The only thing I'd add to that is our first 2 games were tough on the schedule. We had games on both ends of spring break for every kid that goes to school in this town. We had Easter weekend and the weekend either prior or before. So that was a struggle. Our bread and butter is youth soccer. That's where we pull the majority of our fans. Hispanic has continued to follow us, and that's been pretty decent as well. But majority of our fans come from families, and our first 2 games were tough to sell because they were spring break. But other than that, out of the next 3 games, we sold out 2 of them. So I think we're back on track. I do. Yeah.